This happened during my sophomore year of college. My two roommates, Josh and Tyler, wanted to go down to Gulf Shores for spring break. I wasn't hugely into the party scene, but I didn't want to spend the week sitting around my dorm, so I agreed to go. We didn't have a massive budget, so instead of staying at one of the big resorts on the beach, we found a relatively cheap rental house about 2 miles inland. It was half of a duplex. We had the left unit, and there was a mirrored unit on the right. We got down there on a Sunday afternoon. The place was pretty bare bones, but it was clean and it had beds, which was all we really cared about. There was a door in our kitchen that connected to the other side of the duplex. I checked it when we first walked in, just out of habit. It was dead bolted on our side, and just figured we'd leave it like that for the week. The first day was completely normal. We unpacked, went to the grocery store, and hung out. It wasn't until the second afternoon that we actually saw the people staying in the other half of the duplex. We were sitting on the shared front porch when 3 guys walked out of the right side unit. They looked to be around our age, maybe a year or 2 older. They introduced themselves, and we made some small talk. They seemed friendly enough. One of them, I think his name was Mark, invited us inside their side for a beer. We didn't have any plans, so we went. Their layout was exactly the same as ours, but the very first thing I noticed was that their place was completely empty. I don't mean empty of furniture. I mean it didn't look like anyone was actually staying there. There was no luggage anywhere, no groceries on the counters. Just 2 very large, heavy-looking plastic storage bins pushed into the corner of the living room. I rationalized it by thinking they had just arrived and hadn't bothered unpacking yet. But it still didn't sit right with me for whatever reason. Mark handed us each a beer, but I noticed he handed them to us already opened. I don't know why, but that specifically made me a little uneasy. I pretended to take a sip, but I didn't actually drink any of it. Josh and Tyler drank theirs without thinking twice. While we were sitting there, the guys kept asking us really specific questions. They wanted to know what our plans were for the week, which bars we were planning to go to, and whether we were driving our own car or taking Ubers. I just gave them vague answers. I figured they were just making conversation, but the vibe in the room felt very interrogative. After about 20 minutes, I told my roommates I wanted to go get food, and we left. The next day, we spent the morning at the beach. Around noon, I realized I had left my wallet back at the duplex. Since we weren't that far away, I told Josh and Tyler I'd just walk back and grab it while they held our spot on the sand. It was maybe a 15-minute walk. When I got back to the duplex, I unlocked our front door and walked inside. As soon as the front door closed behind me, I heard a very distinct click come from the kitchen. It sounded exactly like a lock turning. I walked into the kitchen and looked at the adjoining door. The deadbolt on our side was unlocked. I knew for a fact I had checked it on the first day, and none of us had any reason to touch it since then. I stood there for a second, trying to make sense of it. I figured it was possible the property manager had come through for some reason, or maybe Tyler had messed with it, and I just didn't notice. Still, it freaked me out. I locked the deadbolt again, grabbed my wallet, and immediately left to go back to the beach. I didn't mention it to my roommates because I didn't want to sound paranoid. Fast forward to that night. We were back in our living room. Josh and Tyler had been drinking pretty heavily all day and were essentially passed out on the couches. I was completely sober, just scrolling on my phone. The house was completely quiet. That's when I heard a very faint scratching sound coming from the kitchen. I got up and walked over as quietly as I could. The sound was coming from the adjoining door. Someone on the other side was messing with the doorknob. I leaned my head close to the wood and held my breath. I could hear low whispering on the other side. I couldn't make out everything they were saying, but I distinctly heard one voice say, "Just wait until they're asleep." That's when it clicked. The totally empty house, the plastic bins, the opened beers they tried to hand us, the hyper-specific questions about when we'd be leaving the house. They weren't spring breakers. They were there for something else entirely, and they had already been inside our unit once to unlock our side of the door. My heart was pounding. I walked back into the living room and physically grabbed Josh and Tyler by their shirts to wake them up. I kept my voice to a whisper and told them we needed to leave the house right that second. They were groggy and confused, and Tyler started to complain, but I guess he could tell by the look on my face that I wasn't messing around. I grabbed my car keys from the counter. We walked out the front door. The absolute second we stepped onto the porch, the front door of the other unit swung open. Two of the guys stepped out into the dark. They moved fast, stepping right in front of the stairs to block our path. The guy named Mark looked at me and asked where we were going. His friendly tone was completely gone. I gave some nothing answer, saying we were running to a gas station for late-night food. He took a step closer to me and told us to just come inside their place instead. I said no thanks and tried to step around him. When I did, he reached out and grabbed my shoulder. It wasn't a friendly gesture. His grip was tight, and he tried to push me back toward our front door. I didn't even think. My adrenaline just took over. I shoved him backward as hard as I physically could. He stumbled into the porch railing, and I yelled at Josh and Tyler to run. We sprinted down the driveway, piled into my car, and I sped off before any of them could even get off the porch. We drove a few towns over and parked in a well-lit Walmart parking lot. I explained everything to Josh and Tyler, who were completely sobered up by that point. We ended up calling the local police and explaining the situation. An officer took my statement over the phone and said they would send a patrol car to check the property. About 2 hours later, the police called me back. They told me the other half of the duplex was completely empty. The guys were gone, and there was no trace of them having been there at all. We ended up getting a cheap motel room for the rest of the night. The next morning, I called the property management company to explain why we were cutting our rental short. I told the woman on the phone about the guys next door. There was a long pause on the line before she spoke again. She told me the right side of the duplex wasn't rented out for spring break. According to their system, that unit was supposed to be completely vacant for the entire month. We drove home that same day. I still don't know who those guys were or how they got access to that unit. And I really don't want to think about what was in those heavy plastic bins, or what would have happened if I had fallen asleep that night. This happened back in 2018. I was a junior in college, and my roommate David and I decided to drive down to Florida for spring break. We were coming from Ohio, so it was a pretty brutal drive. To save money, the original plan was to just take turns driving and sleep in the car, skipping hotels entirely. By the time we hit northern Georgia, it was around 2 a.m., and we were both completely exhausted. It was pouring rain, and visibility was terrible. David was driving, and he said he couldn't keep his eyes open anymore. I was too tired to take over, so we decided to just find the nearest cheap motel and split the cost. We pulled off at a completely random exit. There was this older, single-story motel sitting by itself right off the highway. It looked incredibly run down, but there were maybe 3 or 4 other cars in the lot, so I figured it was safe enough. We walked into the lobby to get a room. The guy working the front desk was an older man who seemed really annoyed that we were there. We paid in cash. He handed us a physical key attached to a plastic tag and told us we were in room 114. I remember asking him where that was, and he told us to drive around to the absolute back of the building. I thought that was a little weird, considering the entire front row of rooms facing the highway was empty. I reasoned that maybe those rooms were being renovated or something. I didn't really care enough to argue about it. We drove around back. It was pitch black. The motel backed up directly into a dense line of trees, and there were no streetlights on that side of the building. My car was the only one parked back there. We went inside, locked the door, and basically just collapsed. David fell asleep almost immediately. I was dead tired, but I've always had a hard time falling asleep in new places. So I was just laying there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rain. I don't know exactly how much time passed. Let's just say an hour. The rain had slowed down to a drizzle, which is why I was able to hear the sound of an engine idling outside. I sat up a little bit in bed. I could see the headlights of a car shining through the gap in the curtains, reflecting on the wall. I figured it was just another guest pulling around back to park, but the engine just kept idling, and the headlights stayed on. For whatever reason, it didn't sit right with me. I got out of bed and walked over to the window. I moved the edge of the curtain back just enough to peek out. There was an old pickup truck parked parallel to my car, blocking it incompletely. The headlights were pointed directly at our room. There were two guys standing in the rain outside the truck. One of them was looking into the windows of my car with a flashlight, and the other was just staring at our motel room door. I froze. My immediate thought was that they were trying to steal whatever we had left in the car. It freaked me out, but I didn't want to go outside and confront two guys in the middle of nowhere. I figured I'd just let them take whatever they wanted, as long as they didn't try to come inside. But then the guy with the flashlight walked over to the other guy, and they both started walking quietly toward our room. That's when my heart rate really kicked up. I stepped back from the window. I didn't know what to do, so I rushed over to David's bed and shook him awake. I put my hand over his mouth and whispered to him that there were guys outside. He was super confused, but before I could explain anything else, we both heard a loud metallic scratching sound coming from the front door. They weren't trying to pick the lock. It sounded like they were using a crowbar or a screwdriver to wedge the actual door frame open. It was a flimsy wooden door, and I could physically see it rattling in its hinges. I was downright panicking at that point. We didn't have any weapons. I grabbed my phone to call 911, but I had absolutely zero cell service, not even a single bar. The scraping got louder, and the door bowed inward slightly. One of the guys outside was throwing his shoulder into it. I yelled out as loud as I could. I screamed something like, "The cops are already on the way." The rattling at the door stopped instantly. I didn't hear any footsteps or talking. Just a few seconds of dead silence, followed by the truck doors slamming shut and the tires peeling out on the wet asphalt. I looked out the window again. The truck was gone. David and I didn't even pack our bags. We just grabbed our keys and our phones, opened the door, and sprinted to my car. We got in, and I sped around to the front of the building. As we drove past the lobby, I glanced through the big glass windows. The front desk clerk was standing there, staring out at us as we drove away. He didn't look surprised or concerned. He was just watching us. That's when it hit me. The front lot was empty, but he forced us to park behind the building where no one from the highway could see us. He didn't ask for a license plate or any ID when we checked in with cash. We drove for another 2 hours before we finally felt safe enough to pull over at a busy gas station and call the police. We gave them the name of the motel and what happened. But since we didn't have the license plate of the truck and technically nothing was stolen, I don't think they took it very seriously. They just told us they'd send a cruiser to check the area. We spent the rest of the night sleeping in the gas station parking lot. I don't know what those guys were planning to do if they had actually gotten that door open. But knowing the clerk purposely set us up to be isolated back there is something that still makes me deeply uncomfortable. This happened during my last year of college. I had a pretty tight-knit group of friends, and we wanted to do a trip for spring break, but none of us had the money for a massive resort or a flight down to Mexico. We ended up finding a really cheap rental house in a coastal town in South Carolina. I won't name the exact town, but it was basically dead that time of year. It was mid-March, so the water was freezing, and a lot of the local businesses were still closed for the off-season. There were 4 of us: me, my girlfriend Mia, and 2 of our friends, Chris and Sam. The house was about 3 blocks back from the actual beach. It was a nice enough place, but the area was insanely quiet. I actually liked that at first, just being away from everything for a few days. On our 3rd night there, we walked to a local bar that was about a mile down the main coastal road. We stayed until around 1 in the morning. When we left, we decided to walk back along the beach instead of the road. The road didn't have any streetlights or sidewalks, so walking on the sand just seemed safer. Plus, it was a more direct route to our rental. The beach was completely pitch black. There was no moon out, and the only light came from the occasional house way off in the distance. We were just walking near the water, talking and messing around. After about 10 minutes, I noticed a figure standing near the dunes on our right, maybe 50 yards ahead of us. I figured it was just someone out for a late-night walk, or maybe a local fishing in the dark. I didn't say anything to the others right away. I didn't want to be a paranoid buzzkill over nothing. But as we got closer, the person stepped out from the dunes and started walking in the same direction as us. They were keeping a pretty consistent distance, just staying parallel to our group. I kept an eye on them. I can't lie, it made me deeply uncomfortable. There were miles of empty beach, so the fact that they were perfectly matching our pace didn't sit right with me. I grabbed Chris's arm and whispered to him to look over at the dunes. He saw the guy too. Chris stopped walking for a second just to see what the guy would do. The guy in the dunes stopped walking too. He didn't turn around or keep going. He just stood there in the dark, facing us. That was weird enough, but then Mia gasped and pointed toward the water on our left. There was another person standing ankle deep in the ocean, also completely still, just facing us. I have no idea how I hadn't noticed him before. He was closer than the guy in the dunes. That's when it hit me. I looked straight ahead. The beach angled slightly inward a little further down, forming a kind of bottleneck near a rocky pier. We were walking right into a trap. These guys weren't just wandering around. They were boxing us in. My heart started pounding. I didn't even try to play it cool. I told everyone we needed to get off the beach right now. We turned sharply to our right to head toward the nearest public beach access walkway. The second we changed direction, the guy in the dunes started jogging toward us to cut us off. Chris yelled at him to back off. The guy didn't say a single word. He just kept coming, and he was picking up speed. I shoved Mia and Sam ahead of me and yelled at them to run. We sprinted through the deep sand. It was incredibly hard to run in, and I could hear heavy, fast footsteps thumping in the sand right behind me. I didn't look back. We reached the wooden stairs of the walkway and practically scrambled up them on all fours. We hit the pavement at the top of the stairs, directly under a street lamp. I finally turned around. The guy had stopped at the bottom of the wooden stairs. He was standing just outside the circle of light. He stared up at us for a few seconds, not moving or saying anything, then turned around and walked back into the dark toward the water. We didn't wait around. We ran the rest of the way to our rental and locked every single door and window. We called the police, and they sent a patrol car to drive down the beach, but obviously they didn't find anyone. The officer basically told us there wasn't much they could do since no actual crime had been committed. We ended up packing our stuff and driving back to school the next morning, 2 days early. I still think about how quiet those guys were, and how perfectly coordinated the whole thing felt. It wasn't a random encounter. They were out there waiting for people like us.